Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got a special guest, and that's Kat, one of the co-founders of SimplyVital Health. So thanks for joining us, Kat.
Thank you so much.
I'm really looking forward to this one. Our viewers know that I've got a pharmacy background, and I think healthcare is going to be disrupted in all sorts of ways by blockchain technology. So you guys are trying to build out this platform known as Health Nexus. So what's the story behind this one in your background?
Yeah, so my background is I'm a former hospital administrator at Yale New Haven and created Simply Vital Health out of a couple of different reasons. One was a general desire to just move a little bit faster in my professional career than hospital administration allows. And the second thing is really just I needed our first platform and I couldn't find it. And so those together made a pretty perfect launching point. And at that time, I had already gone down the rabbit hole, if you will, of blockchain technology. I always love hearing about everybody's rabbit holes and where they dive in and start learning about the technology, and really identified it as exactly what you just said, which is this has the opportunity to be very influential in terms of healthcare innovation, leveraging blockchain as a tool. And so once we started moving down that journey, we also identified that there was likely going to be a need for a quote unquote healthcare safe blockchain protocol. And a lot of that reason was because I had, for the hospital, bought and sold technology and had worked in other healthcare locations, also part of conversations about buying and selling technology, and knew very deeply about the concerns around security. And so we assumed and hypothesized that the security that is of Ethereum and Bitcoin, where you don't know where the servers sit, actually won't work in healthcare. And so we hypothesized this, we tested it in the market, and it does seem that healthcare would prefer a quote unquote healthcare safe blockchain protocol. And that is the origin of Health Nexus.
Awesome. So let's dive in and talk about a few of those issues. I mean, in the pre-interview, I was saying that people forget pharmacy is like the only industry that still uses fax machines. And if you go to two different doctors and then the hospital and the pharmacy, none of those people talk to each other, even if you're the patient to all those institutions. So what are all the real world problems you identified that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so we actually wrote a blog post on this that hopefully you can link to. It's like more than 30 ways that you could use blockchain technology and the Health Nexus protocol in healthcare, but also not in healthcare. And one of the things that's really important that we try to remind folks of and entrepreneurs of is that a lot of issues in healthcare are business issues, not necessarily tech issues. So one of the reasons why healthcare data doesn't move in healthcare is because there's not necessarily a business incentive to make that data move. That doesn't mean that there is not a business incentive to be found, but it's just that when we're talking about movement of data, we want to make sure that it's in alignment with a business incentive. So that is a massive issue. Yes, we still use fax machines in healthcare. It's embarrassing, but part of the reason is that they think it's more secure, and in times of stress, perhaps it's just easier to fall back on what you're used to. But you could actually use blockchain technology to support the same processes. And in our Health Nexus protocol, we intentionally started with what's called a key pair system, which allows anybody to govern access to healthcare data. And so what this means is, let's say that I'm a physician and you're a pharmacist, and I need to share data with you. I have a parent key, and I can create a child key or a copy of that key, give it to you, and then you'd be able to access that data. And so assuming that there's some business reason why we need to create that transaction, we can now make it much more efficient. And then with the benefits of blockchain, we can track it in an auditable way, and make it a bit more secure.
Yeah, I think everyone's starting to become familiar with the idea of taking control of their own data again. And in healthcare, it's all siloed, as we spoke about, and there's sort of privacy laws about why the doctor can't actually just send all the person's information. You know, it could be their ex-girlfriend or whatever reason. There's so many reasons why we can't just openly share data. So that key pair system that you've spoken about, I think people are familiar with multi-key signing now with Bitcoin, where you need 2 signatures or 3 out of 5 people to sign it. So if people have their private key in their Medicare card in the future, or if maybe it scans their thumbprint or their retina, we have all these things in our smartphone. That could be one of those signatures giving permission, and then the doctor or the paramedic that finds you unconscious also has permission to access your records. And I guess that sort of segues into the next question about the blockchain you spoke about building. That HIPPO compatible is how you've described it, a permission blockchain, but still open source, so people can build these dApps and whatever. But we can't just have a completely open source, because that would give away with privacy and so on.
Yeah. So we like to call it public permissioned. And so the public side of it is what you described, which is open source, available for others to use. And you know who the nodes are. And that kind of gets to the permission side, which is where there's essentially a level of KYC, or know your customer, that's done on anyone that spins up a node. And there's a requirement that any server that runs the system has to have a level of HIPAA compliance. And this is where there's a little bit of confusion. So HIPAA compliant servers is really we chose that very intentionally, because HIPAA in healthcare, maybe not to the layman, but in healthcare, is widely recognized and globally recognized as a security standard. And so we wanted to make sure that the language, blockchain already is confusing, but if we make it HIPAA compatible, then that starts to speak the language of healthcare. And that's why we have to call it HIPAA compatible and not HIPAA compliant, because HIPAA was never written with distributed systems in mind, so there's really nothing to comply with. Yeah. So it's more HIPAA compatible. But that's what we mean. We called it public permissioned. And that permissioned nature is just so that we can identify who those nodes are. It's always a funny conversation when we are speaking with healthcare leaders and telling them the difference between, say, us and Ethereum, even though we're a fork of Ethereum, but basically saying, like, your node in Ethereum could sit in North Korea and nobody knows that. So ours, on the other hand, we actually know where they sit, who they are. And at this point, everybody in the consortium has a very strong tie to healthcare.
Yeah, so the blockchain purists will say that's not decentralized, but as we go forward, we're going to see more and more use cases that say we don't really mind we're not decentralized. For our fit and for governments to use this in hospitals, it needs this sort of modification, I guess.
Correct. And we do hit a level of decentralization, because so like we as a company, unlike truly permission chains, we as a company actually are not like this protocol could run without us completely, even at this point. And it's run by different consortium members from here to the Philippines. And so we do think that it holds to a level of decentralization that we think healthcare would be most comfortable with.
Cool. So let's talk about the current stage of development. I know you guys raised some funds, but where are you at now developing partnerships and relationships? And I saw you partnered with Shivom, and that precision medicine and genetic data is going to be huge in the future, I believe. So, yeah.
Yeah, so where we are in terms of partnerships and whatnot is, so we've launched the Health Nexus AlphaNet, which means we have different consortium members that are spinning up nodes and just testing the different consensus protocols that we've tested that are very efficient. So we have around almost 20 people that are spinning up nodes for the AlphaNet. And most of them are physicians in the space, or they're developing some sort of application on Health Nexus, so they're in various stages of development. We've had almost, or I guess more than 25 conversations of companies that are in various stages of development on Health Nexus. And really just those conversations keep going, and a lot of just continual interest in, how do you use blockchain in healthcare? We hear that it can be disruptive. We've had a lot of conversations with people that would be considered middlemen, if you will, and just trying to really understand how they can participate in using and leveraging blockchain as a tool to make sure that they continue to stay ahead of the market, but then also trying to understand, like, are we actually going to get replaced? So to meet that demand, we actually created an Udemy course on blockchain and healthcare, because a lot of our time is spent on education. So we were like, let's make this more scalable and just put the course out there. And so it's basics on blockchain, but also, how this actually applies to healthcare. And that helps to scale our team a little bit more. So there's a lot of education still in healthcare.
we can put anything you want in the description below, so I might check out that course as well. The next question I had was just about the future of healthcare in general. So what are the sort of apps that are already being built out or that you would love to see being built out first? And when you talk to these people, sometimes we hear stories of don't even use the word blockchain. Just explain to these people what it can do and the efficiencies it can create.
Exactly. Yes. And that is the message that we like to drive home too is no one should really care that you're using blockchain. They just want to make sure that you're creating an application and solution that helps meet their need or their bottom line or drive efficiency. I'm going to answer what would I like to see first, and that is some sort of efficiency around health insurance. So this is provider credentialing, claims, the entire claims process, narrowing that timeline that it takes for the provider, patient, and health insurance to all come together. And I just think that there is a massive opportunity for efficiency. And I do know that insurance companies, at least here in the United States, are very interested in finding ways to drive efficiency. Obviously, they're for-profit companies, and that helps their bottom line, but that helps drive better patient care too. And so I've heard some bits and pieces of individuals that are looking at this space. I do think that it will be further off just because there's a lot of red tape and political barriers to get through. But that is an area that's just ripe for opportunity. So anything that has to do with insurance would be awesome.
I mean, saying that, I know the wait periods on insurance, but in pharmacy or even in hospital, high-cost items, I can remember filling out physical paperwork and sending it in saying, yeah, we used this $30,000 drug for HIV, and then someone else signs off it, and then you're hoping that it'll get reimbursed, but you've already had to pay $30,000 for this drug. You're hoping it doesn't go out of date in the fridge, and the patient brings in their script on time, and all this stuff is it's just Stone Age the way it works at the moment.
It totally is, and you could say the same thing for devices, for the OR, or any sort of recall. So pharmaceutical recall or medical device recall. For pharmacies, we have heard some folks that are looking at this space, but counterfeit drugs is big. And being able to track counterfeit drugs. I know that there is a team based here in the United States that actually uses a spectrometer. So, what we used in OChem to actually identify what is in the pill and then seeing if that is a knockoff or a fake pill. But imagine if you were to be able to track that with a blockchain instead, and it would be just a much more efficient process.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite lucky normally sitting here in Australia and the US that we get antibiotics and we know that where they've come from, whereas these platforms start in these developed countries, but we forget what they can do in the developing countries and whatnot, where sometimes the medicine doesn't contain any of the active ingredient or it's just the wrong thing altogether, and all those sorts of things happen.
Yeah, I lived on the Texas-Mexico border for a while, and the biggest thing was people went to Mexico to get their prescriptions. But I never felt comfortable doing that because I had no way to validate what was actually in the medication. And I don't know, it just seemed, it made me very nervous, but people did that all the time. It'd be nice if they had a way to track the, validity of the prescription they were receiving.
Cool. Well, any final thoughts, Kath? I think we've sort of touched on most of the things that I wanted to bring to people's attention about the benefits of blockchain, and hopefully if this gets built out, it will become the backbone for all these other apps to be built on top of.
Yeah, I think the last thing to leave with is if there are any developers or budding entrepreneurs out there that are interested in using blockchain as a tool, all of the code is open source on github.com/health-nexus. We'll put that in the notes too.
Yeah.
And you can get started developing now. There are so many opportunities in healthcare and how you can use blockchain as a tool. And I mean, you have Alex as a resource, you have us and our team as a resource, and just reach out and let's start the conversation.
Cool. Okay. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kat. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to talking to you guys again in the future.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.